Okay, so the first question is, how did you become a non-feminist woman?
Well, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, but I would say that I was educated and kind of conditioned to be a feminist. I think most women are in Western civilization because all of our school shows the propaganda and the misinformation. There's a lot of demonization of men and families. So I was definitely educated to be a feminist, and I just thought that that was the way that I was supposed to be all through university. When I got older and I got a professional job working in the STEM fields in the software industry. I'm a technical writer, so I work in male-dominated fields, and so I noticed a lot of the conditions for men at work, and it wasn't lining up to what I noticed, like what I had learned in school mostly. So I saw things at work like the terrible consequences of our family court system, for example, on fathers, and the demonization of fathers, traditional masculinity, and the mental health problems. About 75% of the suicides are male, and there's like no attention given it to whatsoever. So just basically the realization, working in a male dominated field, I saw the reality. But something wasn't making much sense to me, so I started investigating all these issues on my own at
Okay,
that point.
okay. Would you say that we in the West live in a patriarchy, or how would you describe society in that sense?
No, I think that's a Marxist philosophy. Basically, if you look at the beginnings of feminism, at Seneca Falls, that was the late 1800s. Feminism started exactly the same year as communism. And if you look at the first document of feminism, and first wave feminism, it's called the Declaration of Sentiments. It's pretty much word for word, sounds exactly like the Communist Manifesto. Like it's exactly the same document. They just basically took out the idea of the bourgeoisie and the uh, what do you call it, the proletariat, and they just replaced it with patriarchy. So oversimplification of the power dynamic between men and women. So in the West, yeah, they've just basically copied communism.
Right.
And I think that there is such thing as like a male hierarchy,
Hmm.
but I don't believe that it's nefarious or harmful to women. If you look at other animals in the animal kingdom, like they don't have males that cooperate that are unrelated. But our species is the only species where unrelated males cooperate, and they're doing all the dirty and dangerous jobs. And they are most of the workplace deaths. And so our species has become very successful because of the work that I would say the partnership of men has done for women to build, everything that's safe. And women don't have to do all this hard work, right? I don't want to work in the coal mine, and
Hmm.
so men do all this work. So I would say that that's like something that would be a patriarchy because that's unique to human beings,
Hmm.
that the unrelated males cooperate. But I don't believe it's like nefarious or harmful. I actually believe it's very beneficial
Right.
to
Okay.
women and children. Yeah.
Right. Okay. What are your thoughts on traditional gender roles?
I think that because of the circumstances before modernity, like before all the things that we've had, like modern birth control, which was invented by men, by the way. So all these conveniences for women, like dishwashers that are relaxed, are traditional gender roles for women. But I'm concerned that there's no relaxation whatsoever for men's traditional gender roles. Like we're still very hard on them. There's, like, I don't know if you know much about family law, but it started as something in the Victorian era called coverture,
Hmm.
which means that, so Victorian era gender roles was very, very strict. I'm sure you can imagine. But that's before all the modern technology, right? And so things were much harsher in those conditions. And so the gender roles were very strict to help us get through hunter gatherer times, for example, right? So that would be that men were providing and protecting, and women were doing more nurturing and childbearing and caring and caregiving. And so that's where the traditional gender roles, and it's hormonally driven, I believe, and it's part of our biology. And I believe it was kept us alive through most of the millennia, right? So there's been modern technology that has been able, and I'm not against that if we can have better lives. I mean, women would like to work sometimes and have more of a work life balance and do other things that they find meaningful in their life besides have children. I don't think there's anything wrong with women having children. My mother was a stay at home mom, but I'm concerned that there isn't a lot of gender role relaxation, like absolutely none. They're still pulverized. Men are still pulverized, supposed to pay like these outrageous, fees in family court, and it's totally out of control. Mostly because of the feminism only wanting to relax women's gender roles and increase women's privileges, but there's never any like relaxation of men's traditional gender roles. Maybe men would like to spend more time with their children, not always working all the time. So I think there can be some balance, especially in the modern era with the technology that we have, to have more relaxation. But I do think it's hormonally driven. And so if you see something like Sweden, where they have like forced it through the state, that there's like complete equality in gender roles, and men can stay home if they want to, but men are still choosing to work outside the home if they can. In those circumstances, women are still choosing. And so when you give people choice, you'll see in like Swedish, for example, or these Norway, the gender divide gets even worse than it is here, because if they will go towards their biological drive, right? So so I think it's fine to have some relaxation, but I think feminists have only relaxed the women's role, in my opinion. That's what I would say about that.
Okay, what are your thoughts on MRAs, men's rights activists?
Oh, I think it's highly stigmatized. When I was in university, I was told many things by my feminist professor, and there's a lot of propaganda I see in the mainstream demonizing them. I think it's a propaganda campaign to hide the issues affecting men. So they misrepresent the MRA and stigmatize it. It's mostly because of the feminist juggernaut misrepresenting it. But when I've talked to the MRAs, like I've talked to many of them, all the issues are legitimate. Like they're not talking about entitlement to women's bodies, which is what I was told, that they're pro-rape. None of that is true. When I actually talk to them, they're talking about men's high suicide rates. They're like 75%, 90% of the homeless, 93% of the workplace deaths, half the domestic violence victims, and there's no services for them. They're assumed to be perpetrators when they try to get help if they're the victim of sex assault. So it's like all these issues, one after the other, that are completely legitimate, and I feel that they've been very unfairly stigmatized, and I believe it's on purpose.
Okay.
To demonize them.
Yeah. What would you say are the biggest issues facing men today?
Well, I've been part of a national Canadian organization called the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, and I've been with them for many years. And about 80% of the service requests are all related to family law. So that would be the number one issue. But everything else stems from that. Like a lot of the homeless comes from men being railroaded through family court or not being helped with domestic violence services. Most of the suicide, I believe. So that would be the main issue, is family court. But all the other issues, like the lack of services for domestic violence, are all related to that one issue of family law.
Okay.
Definitely. And the false accusations too, and the wrongful convictions are definitely related. A lot of women leverage false accusations in family court. And I've seen men be convicted as sex offenders because they were winning in family court. And so the woman just arbitrarily threw in accused the man of being a sex offender, and it was just to win a family court. So this man is now in jail. It's really unfair.
Right.
Very unfair.
And what could be done in family court to make it better for men? What is the actual problem? Is it bias that they face, or what do they face?
Yeah, so I've actually started I know in the USA, I think it's more state by state that you have to change your systemic problem. You do need services to help men with their immediate problems, but really I think women are going to have to take the lead on fixing the systemic problem. So there's a really good documentary you can watch. It's called Erasing Family, and it goes over the problems in the Western world with family court, and it'll show you how this is a systemic problem. It's not just it's not a one-off here and there. We have to fix the system to the core, which means we need to start helping fathers and families and stop demonizing them at the systemic level, at the highest levels in our federal government and our parliament. Because these feminist lawyers, like for example in Canada right now, the National Association for Women in Law, it's a feminist, most powerful special interest group in Canada. is trying to change our Divorce Act, which is a federal divorce act that affects all of our family law systems in here in Canada. And so they're passing all these laws that are misandric and hateful to men, and then men wonder why they don't get a fair deal in court. It's because the policy, right, where the feminists are changing it in our legislation. So I would say to change the system, we need to educate ourselves. We need to watch Erasing Family and see how the system works and understand how feminists, the misinformation from them, the disinformation from them, is actually affecting our whole system in the way that the politicians are taking laws. So our politicians, some of them are good, but they're taking the bribe and taking the misinformation and making bad choices for our legislation. And they're not understanding all the data and the actual information that's actually happening to men and families. And so it's just it's kind of like disinformation from tobacco companies we saw like decades ago, where they would spread misinformation to maintain power and make lots of money and all of that. So you have to educate people about how the system is working, how these special interest groups are spreading misinformation, and how legislation is being passed based on complete bullshit, basically. So it's a whole systemic problem. We do need to help each man so they don't commit suicide, and women can be targeted parents too. I mean, a lot of other people fall through the cracks because it is a for-profit. But as I said, Erasing Family shows the high financial and emotional costs of our family law system, and it also shows the shared parenting default that we see in some places like Sweden, and some states have passed shared parenting laws where there's no more lawyers involved and there's no more billable hours.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a whole. I think it's a process to educate people and make sure that they're pressuring the politicians to vote correctly on the legislation and not pander to this shrill minority of feminist lawyers that are trying to pass the wrong information, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I agree with the default shared parenting. I think that is really
yes. There should be lawyers involved if there's proof of child abuse, but there's really no reason to financially destroy a family, because it's very expensive to go through a big custody battle, right? It's very expensive.
Right, and it should always be default shared parenting. I don't know why people...
So if there's a default of shared parenting and there's no lawyers involved, in, like if a child is entitled to have both the mother and the father in their life after the divorce, and with mild, like no disruption to the child's life whatsoever, they still see both sides of their family, that's actually best for the child, not financially destroying both parents in the family court process, right? So the only people that benefit from this are the feminists, because they are trying to cover up how often women are abusing children and using them as a way to get more child support, and they also make false accusations. So they don't want this. They want to keep the system the way it is because it proves it justifies their whole women's studies, gender studies, the whole juggernaut, and the feminist lawyers. Like if they have this, they're using family court as proof that men are more abusive. But if the truth comes out, and then everybody realizes actually how many women, then their whole patriarchy narrative falls apart, right? So that's why they're covering up all the female perpetrated child abuse in family court. And it's a very slow process to educate people, but we need to do it because they're abusing children, basically. Women kill and abuse more children than men do, and they've been covering that up for decades. And this will expose all the child abuse if anybody realizes what these feminists are doing in family court, right? So women have been murdering, and I have citations, I can prove this, and they have all the data, and they've deliberately covered this up because it's not profitable, because gendered violence is worth $1 billion a year, right? And there's millions of dollars disappearing into these feminist orgs right now. So they're covering up all the facts in family court about the female perpetrated child abuse. They're covering up all these facts about domestic violence not being gendered. They're covering up all the female perpetrated child abuse and child murder, because it's worth a lot of money to them. The money, the government just gives them money for gendered violence, which means that they're saying that only women are always victims and men are always perpetrators of domestic violence. But if the truth about family court comes out, then where are they going to get their money from? It's a lot of money they're going to lose, right? I have been in a women's shelter here in Canada, and I got thrown out by the feminists because I brought up Canada Stats and the gender parity that the Canada Stats has thrown for years. And I brought up the crime filter, which is what feminists use to cover up the information. Basically, what feminists do is they tell police to only arrest men by default if there's a call for a domestic violence incident. They tell the police to only arrest the men, and then they use those same arrests as proof that men are more violent. So it's a circular logic, right? It's a crime filter, and that's what they say are the stats for domestic violence, but that's not the actual stats. In actual Canada stats, if you ask men and women the same questions for domestic violence, you get something that shows relative gender parity, and it's actually intergenerational and not gendered, right? Domestic violence is not gendered, it's intergenerational. It's a pathology that happens from generation to generation. The child sees the bad things from their parents, and they think that's the way to solve problems in the family, right? And so, I don't know if you know Erin Pissy. Do you know Erin Pissy?
Yeah, from the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, so she opened up the first domestic violence shelter in the early 1970s in the UK, took in 100 women, and noticed half of them were just as violent as their male counterparts, which means they were beating their kids and beating other people's kids, right? And Erin Pissy was beaten by her own mother and abused quite badly. And so she was going to open up a second shelter for men, right? And when the feminists found out that she was going to open up a shelter for men and their children, battered men and kids, the feminists shot her dog. They sent her bomb threats, and the police had to check her mail. Basically, when they shot her dog, then Erin Pissy had to leave the country, and nobody helped her. And she's been saying for decades that this is not a gendered issue; it's actually intergenerational, right? So I think that so all these issues are related, but basically the cover up in family court is because of gendered violence being worth $1 billion a year at least. And Erin Pissy even brings that up in the Red Pill about how much money they're making off these false narratives, right? So I think it's up to women like us to be more outspoken and start telling the truth about this, because we can help a lot of people, and especially expose the child abuse that they're doing, because they're leftist elite women that are profiting off of this, and they're just putting the money in their own pocket, and they're covering up the child murder and the child abuse to benefit themselves, which is the truth. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
It is. It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What are your thoughts on intersectionality?
I think that is just, I'm interested in minority issues, but I think that this is just another case of where feminists are hijacking, they're leftist elite women that are hijacking minority issues to make themselves seem relevant. So they just, they just decide that they don't have any real issues of their own, so they're going to just, hijack minorities they don't even understand, and then use those people as like a token, I think.
To say that they are good.
Many times.
It's like, yeah, because they want to say they stand on the side of equality and goodness. So they take people who have issues like minorities and
real
LGBTQ
issues,
and then say, oh, we stand up for them. So if you attack us, then you're attacking minorities. If you attack
so they're
us,
using you. They're using any minority they can find, and they don't really understand the issues half the time anyways. I find that they're really, superficial about their understanding, and they really don't understand the nuance of a lot of these minority issues.
They try to feed the minorities victim status, which, of course, would feel good.
Using it.
Right. So it's kind of like trying to pay the minorities off. They're like, we'll pay you off by giving you victim status, so everyone will feel sorry for you, and you get a pass for whatever you do because you're a victim, right? And then they say, we're standing up for you. You're a victim. We are your, But at the same time, it's absolute nonsense, because whether or not minorities have issues or LGBTQ, that doesn't make it that women and men are in this same position just because, Yeah.
I can tell you one thing that really bothered me at one incident at work. I was at like a force, because a lot of these feminists have like these talks that you have to go to, and I was a contractor at a large publicly owned company here in Canada, and so I had to go to one of these education things, and they had about 4,000 people on the call, and we had to sit there and listen, and we weren't allowed to ask any difficult questions. And they basically, what they did is these white women bring out a residential school survivor. I don't know if you know what the residential schools here are in Canada. They brought this poor Indigenous woman out who had found a baby in the dumpster when she was a child. The priest had raped a girl, and then when they in the residential school, and then to get rid of the evidence, the priest put the baby in the dumpster. So she found the baby in the dumpster, and she was talking with this horrific traumatic event that happened to her and her childhood. This First Nations woman, right? This Indigenous woman. And then as soon as they're finished using this woman, they don't help her with any kind of like help after she's just like fallen apart here in front of all these people at this event, educational event, right? And as soon as they're finished using people like this, the feminist, the white woman, the upper middle class white woman who's woke, they push her to the side, and then they start talking about their issues because they were only using this person long enough to get some attention.
I agree.
They want to be a CEO. They want to be a CEO. They talk about the bullshit like the wage gap.
Of course.
Like a bait switch.
Exactly.
Switch, right?
They pull all the minorities under this one umbrella of goodness to say we are the good people, and guess what? Women are oppressed as well. But hey, wait a minute. Wait. How did we throw women into this? Women didn't have anything to do with this. Women exist from rich to poor and and yeah. And that's one side of it. There's so many issues with intersectionality, but that's like a major issue. I agree that they've been
use the minorities. It really bothers me when they try to equate finding a baby in the dumpster with not enough women CEOs, white women CEOs. Yeah. I was so sickened by that when they just use this poor woman, this First Nations woman, long enough, and then they don't help her. I was wondering about her. Like I'm like I need therapy after listening to this. Like this is horrible. And then they just use this woman long enough, and then they push her to the side, and they want to go back to talking about their white woman issues, their upper middle class. It's just a bait and switch and using these people. In my opinion,
I agree. That is totally true. And also, I mean, that's one aspect of intersectionality that pisses me off, and the other aspect is when they're just mean. Because they use these things to say you're privileged, which is just stereotyping, and it's mean, and it's it's.
Well, that's what I said, that they are very superficial in their understanding.
Yeah,
it's just enough to get for their politicization, and it's not sincere concern about anyone's issues. No, they have no sincerity. I mean, and there's no nuance.
Even if there's no nuance. This is ridiculous. Yes, there are disadvantages and privileges within society, but it's a nuanced thing. It's something you can analyze at some sort of high level, but it's not something that you could go around to people and assume stuff about them. You can't assume things about.
It's very complex, and they're just users. They're users. That's all they do. They use people long enough to get what they want.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on hypergamy?
I think that's probably correct. I mean, women in the hunter-gatherer society, we were. If you look at bonobos and other species that were closely related to, in a lot of species, they have one male that's the strongest male that gets all the females, right? And that's because of biology. I think it's a normal human behavior for women to do that, to go for the strongest male. Because in hunter-gatherer society, when we were living in the elements, like women, if they want to survive, because they're very vulnerable when they're pregnant and when they are trying to feed their children and live in this difficult situation, that they're trying to find a male that can provide and protect for them. So I don't think it's bad. I just think it's something to be aware of, that women will gravitate towards a man that can provide and protect for them, which is why men are organized in a hierarchy, and men should not be demonized for that, because that's what they have to do to survive as well, right? And there's different hierarchies. Like Jordan Peterson goes into the male hierarchies. A man can be the best, graphic designer, or the man can be the best engineer. Like there's different hierarchies. The man can do this, the man can do that. But that's just the way that men and women have had to survive for so long, that it's nobody's fault. That's just the way it is. Like women have to go for a strong man, because that's what women need for survival, right?
Okay. What are your thoughts on gynocentrism?
I think it's absolutely true that the world revolves around women. I think that is the whole concept of circles, the circular feminine, is I think that is much more realistic than saying that we're organized in a patriarchy. Like the whole concept of women, like for example, the success that I've had talking about men's issues, it's really obvious that, and Karen Strawn and a lot of women, you can see that women's voices on social issues were listened to quite a bit more.
Yeah, also with women against feminism back in the day. I don't know if you were there, right? You were. I mean, you've seen what happened, right?
Yeah. So, women are much more successful.
Yeah,
talking about.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why it's really nice when women speak up, because
yes, I'm so grateful when other women do as well. When other women will say something. about the unfairness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so gynocentrism is one of the reasons that women against feminism exist even, and why it,
and why you've been successful as much as you have. Yeah.
Exactly, because people listen when women speak, and and men support women who say things that are logical and stand up for them, and it's okay. What are your thoughts on male reproductive rights?
I think that would be fair, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen. I know that women have protested, or feminists have protested against male birth control, and then they blame it on men. But I remember in the 1970s, I was reading an article. I'm not that old, but an article from the 1970s. Dr. Coelho, I think, his name was. So it's actually been feminism that's blocked male reproductive rights more than anybody. It's not surprising because they stomp on lots of people's human rights. They're a very extremist collectivist ideology that stomps on human rights. So I'm not surprised. I'd like to see men have some reproductive rights, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I'm more concerned about helping them right now in family court with the children that they do have, because I feel like that's what's making them commit suicide. So that's my main concern that right now is the family court.
Okay. So, but in theory, if women are to have abortion, do you think society should look like with the abortion debate? Do you think society should look into, for example, men being able to opt out or something like that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think that would actually help. Like right now, women are deliberately, we're talking about hypergamy. Like I see lots of you see online all these famous men that have all these women that deliberately get pregnant by them because they got a lot of money, right? So maybe that would prevent some women from getting pregnant because they're doing it on purpose,
right?
And now if they know they know that men can opt out, I think that would prevent a lot of unwanted pregnancies where there's no father, because the women now have to. If they're going to do that, they're not going to necessarily have the support of the father anymore. So maybe they'll think twice about getting pregnant on purpose by some man that has not consented, right?
Right. Okay. What are your thoughts on being called a pick-me girl?
I mean, I get attacked every single day, and I have been for the last 9 years. I've been thrown out of a women's shelter. I've been thrown out of the UFC for trying to show the Red Pill documentary. Every single day, I just ignore it basically, and I just I've been bullied by females, my whole toxic femininity my whole life, so I just don't care anymore.
Right.
I'm just used to it. I'm just used to it.
Right. Okay. Can you think of a story, any story that maybe someone's story, a guy's story, where you said you work with in Canada with the national organization? Can you think of any story that just a moving story that is related to feminism or men's rights or so
on? There's lots of stories that I can tell, but there is one story that I can think of where one case that has really affected me. It was the story where I told you where the guy got convicted. So I was working on Dean's case. Working with Diana Davison, kind of looking over some of the notes. But Dean, I went to his. He basically was trying to get reasonable access to his son, and he was separating from a very toxic ex who did not want to share the parenting with him after the separation. And boys should see their father. So basically, he put in quite a bit of effort to get access to his son, and so it looked like he was going to get reasonable custody. And so the ex, who was so spiteful, she got her 2 daughters from her previous relationship to make false accusations against him of sex assault just out of the blue, just when it was convenient. And so because of the feminist spin on this Me Too movement and everything, it was just bad timing for him, I guess. And so he got convicted for trying to fight for his son with no evidence. And I saw him at the hearing when he was getting his sentence for the sex offense. It was a false accusation and a wrongful conviction in my idea. But I remember looking at him and just seeing his bottom lip tremble. So he's a registered sex offender now, and he was now in prison. He's now in prison for 10, 12 years or something like that. And it really was effective on me to see him in the court reacting. the look on his face. But that's basically the state of fathers right now, is that if you try to fight for your child, you're going to get punished by this draconian feminist regime, and you'll get registered as a sex offender. And I believe he has been assaulted in jail for this. So, and now he's wrongfully convicted. And I believe there's millions of men like him that are in this position. So that's why I spend so much time trying to change family court. Because we can talk about theories, we can talk about wrongful conviction, we can talk about all these issues, but that's the reality. Is I always talk about the people like that, right? Because that's what feminists do, is they stay in their ivory tower and they've got all these postmodern ideas and the spin, and they don't see people that they're affecting. They don't see that woman that found a baby in the dumpster while they're just using her. They don't see any people. And that's why when I think of Dean, I think about people and not just theory, right? So that's a story that I always think about.
Thanks. Okay, so if you had to sum up your views on feminism, like say your general views on feminism, what would you say?
I would say that it's a reactive movement. I mean, I would say that there's like maybe a justifiable, like I can understand the trauma from really extreme controls over women and their sexuality, and I understand from religion, for example, like the extreme controls, not just of women but also LGBT. So I believe it's a reactionary movement from those abuses, but it's just a case of from this abuse, and then they don't see the men that were also suffering under the extreme gender roles, right? They're just like navel gazing people, and so it's just, I think it's an unhealthy reaction from the Victorian era controls, and they made up they've just basically, because they're not smart enough to think of anything themselves, they've just basically taken the Communist Manifesto and reworked it into something called the Declaration of Sentiment, and people have just taken the dogma and applied it to people with disastrous results. So that's how I would summarize feminism.
Right, okay. Yeah, I agree. It's, it was bad in the past. We had religious society, which was strict on men and women, but they don't see men's part, they just see women.
Yeah, and very strict on the LGBT and quite cruel.
Yes, LGBTQ people genuinely have problems, especially in the anti-feminist world. I notice it because we have anti-feminism, and then you have all these people who are against trans people, and this comes up very often. And I don't know or can't explain why the trans thing blew up like that. Why is it that so many people, why?
I can explain. So I don't know if you know about the connection between parental alienation and non-binary, but there's a connection. So gender dysphoria is real. I know that if you look on a brain with the MRI scans, you can see a male and a female brain. The man has like 10 times the amount of gray matter, and women have way more of the white matter, right? So you can see a brain, which means that if there's a male and a female brain, then someone can be born in the wrong body, in my opinion. But this non-binary is something very different. And like I said, we're talking about nuance and distinction, okay? So if these kids are saying, okay, I'm a dragon gender, I'm a Harry Potter gender, I'm a cat gender, this is not gender dysphoria. This is something else, okay? With these kids going on Instagram and saying that they're all these strange identities. And what I have noticed in family court is the terrible identity trauma that these kids go through, okay? Because they're having half of their family. If you think about how important your family is and your family connections to your identity as you're growing up and feeling the walls around you and having some sort of sense of yourself, okay? So if you have half of yourself, if you're being used as a pawn as a child in family court, okay, and then having half of your identity demonized by your alienating parent, your pathological parent who's telling you that side of your family is garbage, okay, that part of your identity, that half of yourself is now erased. That's what happens to these alienated kids, okay? So they have a big void inside of them, and they're children, and so they're reacting. So they're trying to find an answer about their erased sense of self. They've lost half their parent, half their support system, half their grandparents. All that side of their family is now gone, right? So what these kids are doing is they're saying, oh, I got this. They're reacting. They're going on Instagram or Tumblr and saying that there's this other identity, this make believe, which is very common in children, right? Like when they're traumatized, they try to make up some story. right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I believe the non-binary, because you're seeing this a lot in children, right? This adolescents and kids saying that they're all these strange identities, non-binary and stuff, and I believe that it's a reactivity to family court and the trauma that it causes on children. So that's my theory, and I believe the feminists, intersectional feminists, as dumb as they are trying to impose this false ideology and trying to cover up the child abuse, just the same old stuff from them. And they're saying that these kids are gender dysphoric when actually they're suffering from child abuse and trauma and lost identity from the family court crisis. So I believe this whole non-binary explosion is an attempt by feminism to cover up the crimes of feminism on children.
Yeah.
They're trying to conflate this with gender dysphoria when actually these kids are saying they're non-binary because they're actually traumatized from family court and their identity crisis in family court. So that's what I believe that's about. And I have studies that show the relationship. I can prove it scientifically now. I can send you a study if you want to see the relationship between non-binary kids and parental alienation trauma. If you want to see it, I have it.
Okay. So do you have like a YouTube channel or how, are you vocal in that way? Like how can people find your work?
Yeah, I've been at like I told you, I was at that Canadian Center for Men and Families a long time. I can send you a link for some of the events, but I don't have like a YouTube channel where I really pontificate because I feel like that's not useful. Like just talking about the theory, I told you I'm all about the people. So I only really talk about issues when I can actually apply it to real issues. And so I usually do interviews, and I have a Facebook group for Facebook, and I've turned it into a nonprofit actually for Canada. So we're gonna, like I said, I'm very practical, very applied, very people focused.
What
not
is the Facebook
so much
group name?
The Facebook group is called Parental Alienation Canada, and it's an education and support group, and we talk about these issues, about the effects. But like I said, I'm not theory based. I'm all applied all the time.
Okay.
And so we talk about all this stuff, and I don't just write for the sake of writing. I do have some publications that I can send you that have been published to a men's lawyer here in Canada. I can send some of that to you.
No, well, I mean, like below the video, I would link to you so that people could like find you, so I could link to your group.
We have the YouTube channel for Parental Alienation Canada that I can send you. Yeah, if you want to see that. Yeah, it's got a lot of my interviews that I've done with experts on parental alienation and a lot of the domestic violence issues and stuff. So yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, those were all of the questions. I don't know if there's anything else that you can think to say or to talk about with respect to feminism, since we have like just a little bit more time. I
just want to say that I'm not anti-feminist. I'm anti the ideology, because I understand the feminists are people, and there's a lot of working class feminists that join feminism because they concerned about women's issues, and so am I, because there are legitimate issues in women's issues. Like there's a lack of respect for women, but I have a disagreement on how to get respect for women than with feminists. Like I don't believe that these bullying tactics are going to help women get respect. I think actually women being good people is what's going to get women respect. So some issues I agree with, but I'm not against the feminists because they may just be ignorant. I'm mostly just against the ideology and the bad ideas. I just want to clarify that I'm not against any people.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. So that's it then. Thanks a lot for interviewing. I really appreciate you taking the time to interview with me, and yeah,